Today I'm joined by Tom McKeown, a commercial leader operating at the intersection of pharma, biotech and go-to-market strategy. Tom is Vice President of Commercial Operations at IM4 Pharma. Tom, welcome. You've spent years in commercial side of pharma, working closely with decision makers who ultimately say yes or no to new solutions. If we look at your career not as a list of roles, but as a journey of perspective, what did it teach you about how this industry truly evaluates value beyond innovation and buzzwords?
Thank you, Marina. Nice to be here. So, I've been thinking about this before we spoke. Really, for me, every customer, they view solutions through the lens of their own challenges. So, if you think about the first ever solution that came to market, like the wheel, a salesperson will tell you that product's main feature is that it's round, but the real meaning to the user is that it allows you to move heavy objects more easily. So decision makers, solution evaluators, even end users within life sciences organizations evaluate value in several different ways. Of course, there's the standard metrics for B2B solutions, such as cost reduction, productivity increase, revenue gains. But this criteria, I feel, is evaluated a little bit of a later stage of the purchasing process than you might see in less complex industries. For a tier one pharma company, the evaluation and approval process can take anywhere from 6 to 8 months, even longer for more complex software solutions, ERPs, things like that. Nobody is going to begin this evaluation process and commit the time required before getting a sense that the solution provider understands the needs of their organization. If you think about it, why would you engage with a vendor who has no idea about the complex regulatory environment that life sciences have to navigate on a daily basis? It could be a great solution, but if you're going to spend 6 months in meetings explaining compliance issues and other considerations, difficult, You need to show your customer in life sciences from the very beginning of the conversation that you've understood their needs, that you know their challenges and you can help them to achieve their objectives. And not only how you can do this, but also that you've considered the potential issues that could arise from changing their solution. Even for something as simple as producing content. My first role where I was selling to the life sciences industry was with a small kind of boutique agency that produced medical explainer videos. So, a 2 to 3 minute animated video with a high level description of a scientific publication, things like, phase 1 to 4 trials, MOA, dosing guidelines. And, you think that for something as simple as a 2-minute video, it would be an easy process for both, the supplier and the customer. So our specialization, it allowed us to create a production process whereby we aligned with the needs of the customer and their approval process, making their life easier instead of adding work or issues for them to solve. For medical content, you have to take into account all kinds of things, SMPC info, job codes, approval codes. These all need to be included in the video. And you'd be surprised how many animation studios or content producers, they will approach a pharma company and offer their services without actually realizing that their customer has these needs. Recently, there's been a shift, especially with kind of brand and marketing managers in pharma, where they now insist that their agency has a license or training for their approval system. But all that is to say really that, that life sciences companies want to work with vendors who already understand their needs. They don't want to have to spend hours in meetings explaining why they need certain features or why they need to work in a specific way. Everybody wants to be a trusted advisor to their clients, but if you don't understand their industry, then you'll never be able to provide trusted advice.
Definitely, and what you are describing, Tom, resonates deeply with my own experience in this industry. And actually, I still remember attending one of your offline masterclasses where you unpacked fundraising for startups. And what stayed with me was the logic you shared, framing pitching and fundraising as a downstream outcome rooted in understanding how decision makers actually think long before money or contract enter the conversation. And that's exactly what comes through in your answer here. These fundamentals, understanding regulatory context, internal approval dynamics, and real cost of change are universal. Whether a company is raising capital, selling a service, or introducing a new technology into pharma or biotech, the same principle applies. If you don't understand how value is evaluated inside the organization, you are not ready to ask for yes. Digital solutions are everywhere, literally, in healthcare. From your perspective, Tom, how should pharma and biotech leaders distinguish between real innovation and well-packed technological noise?
Yeah, that's a good question. I was reading recently that within life sciences, something like 85% of AI projects that are currently being developed, either in-house or with partners, will fail. In my opinion, it's not necessarily a shortcoming of AI, but a failure of the teams implementing these projects to define clear objectives and success criteria for the project before they begin, But whether it's AI, whether it's digitalization, whether it's any kind of organizational change, that has always been the case. For any new technology or solution, before you begin that project, you need to ask yourself, what do you want to achieve? I remember when pharma was forced maybe not, but they had to move to digitalization, mainly because of the COVID pandemic. And the teams that really stood out in terms of achieving objectives were always the people that had a clear vision of how the new solution would impact the business and how to measure this impact. If you take omni-channel software as an example, it really took off a few years ago. A lot of decision makers find it difficult to show a return on investment for the solution because they were purchasing a buzzword as opposed to a solution. That's not to say that omni-channel software doesn't help life sciences companies. It's more that the goals need to be defined in a tangible and measurable way. A lot of projects in life sciences fail, not because it was poorly executed, but because nobody knows how to measure the impact. So, to answer your question, in order to distinguish between real innovation and well-packaged technological noise, decision makers need to define clear, tangible success metrics. Ask your vendor, have you worked with clients in the life sciences industry before? And if they have, how did you measure the impact that the solution had for their client? If they can't answer this question, or if the answer is vague, then there's a good chance that they don't really know how they can help your organization, apart from vague promises such as increased efficiency. Pharma leaders, pharma decision makers, they need to consult internally with IT procurement, operations teams, and understand if there's any solutions that are currently owned that can provide the same outcome. In large organizations, it can be really difficult to get a clear view of the tools that you have at your disposal. So engaging other business units and departments can help you to understand if purchasing another solution is really necessary. A lot of the time when selling software solutions to pharma, the IT team becomes a bit like a parent when their child asks for a new toy. I'm sure we all remember the phrase, you don't play with the toys that you have. Why should I get you this new toy?
Yes, Tom, and this aligns closely with what I can see across pharma and biotech as a trend. Even strong solutions struggle to demonstrate their value. What differentiates meaningful innovation from noise is discipline, actually, and alignment between leadership, business needs, and the reality of how complex organizations actually operate. When a pharma company evaluates an AI or digital health startup, what should they look at first, even before discussing the technology, to understand whether the solution is genuinely relevant to their organization or business or not?
So, the first thing that they should look at is whether or not they have a challenge that the vendor can solve. I've seen it a lot. Unfortunately, there are a lot of people within life sciences whose sole interest is remaining consistent with what their peers in the sector are doing without giving any thought to the outcomes of the project. Keeping up with what other business units or competitors are doing, it really only makes sense if there's an actual need for a solution. If you can see clearly that there's a need for a solution, then the first step should always be to view the case studies for the vendor and see how they've helped other near-peer competitors or companies with a similar profile to yours.
And let's talk about validation. What concrete questions should pharma or biotech decision makers ask to assess whether an AI technology partner can deliver real impact, integrate into complex organizations, and scale long term?
So again, going back to what I was explaining just now, you always start with why do we need a solution, or even if you want to reverse that, you could ask yourself what would happen if we don't find a solution. So the implication, once you've assessed that, then you need to look at why you would need that solution specifically. And then, like I said, you need to check if you actually already own a solution that can deliver this outcome already. After that, you need to see how do you measure the impact that the solution will have, and then what is a realistic time frame for measuring impact. If you are expecting to see progress in 3 months, it actually takes maybe 6 months for the project to be fully implemented, then you're always going to, be disappointed with the results. Also, taking into account who's going to use the solution, who's going to be affected by the use of the solution, which different business units, which job roles, functions, etc. And, going further than that, how does it affect certain functions like compliance, legal, finance, to understand if there's any if there's going to be any issues that come up during the implementation process. And then after that, it's easy when you're excited about finding a solution or what you think might be a solution to imagine that everybody will use the new solution, but it's very often not the case. So you need to kind of understand, would the other business units that are supposed to use the solution actually going to use it? And to ensure the success, then how would you ensure adoption of the new solution? Is it training? Is it, workshops that help people to understand the benefits of the solution aside from just the top level project features? And this is one of the major reasons why new solutions fail. When you're excited about finding a solution, sometimes, you just assume that everybody else will be just as excited about the solution, but you can never guarantee that unless you communicate and get feedback from the different areas of the business that will be using it.
And what this framework highlights is that validation in pharma is less about technology readiness and more about organizational readiness. These questions force leadership to think systematically about impact, ownership, adoption, and downstream consequences, rather than evaluating a solution in isolation. Long-term scalability in this industry is determined now by how well it fits into the existing operating model and decision structure. Let's get very concrete. Based on your experience, Tom, when pharma companies adopt AI or digital solution, what realistic indicators should they expect to see within 6-12 months to confirm that the partnership is working? And which metrics, adoption signals, or business outcomes actually matter? And which ones are often overemphasized?
User adoption is a crucial metric for any solution being implemented in any business, in any industry. Throughout my career, I've seen it a lot of the time where a business purchases a shiny new software package and end users feel intimidated because this new solution has not been explained to them, and they see it as complex, complicated, or even, in the worst case, they might say it as something that's intended to replace their role. All of the things you see on LinkedIn, you see in the media, it's warnings about AI coming for your job. So that means that nowadays it's even more important to explain to end users why the solution is being implemented and what the goals are. When quantifying the impact of the business for any B2B solution, generally you can boil it down to money or time saved. I mean, time is money, so just money really. Or you would judge it on how it enables the business to increase revenue or removes barriers to gaining revenue. For life science companies, the business outcomes might be a reduction in time spent on approvals, reduced audit time for compliance, legal or finance teams, increased engagement with physicians or patients, better access to payers and reimbursement, And all of these metrics are easily quantifiable and measurable. The main thing is how you quantify these gains. Within the first 6 to 12 months, depending on the solution, you should be able to put a number on the impact to the business as a bare minimum. Very often, vendors will overemphasize metrics such as the cost of their solution. They talk about how their pricing compares to their competitors. It's a little bit ridiculous because if the solution doesn't save time or money or produce a return on investment, then the cost could be anything. It could be free and it still wouldn't matter. Adoption signals themselves can be misleading. A lot of the times, end users will adopt the solution, but in reality, it's little more than a box ticking exercise. It happens a lot in learning and development, for example, within pharma. If you can imagine a pharma rep completing online compliance training without really reading the material, on paper or on your dashboard, it appears as though everybody's using the new training solution and the completion rates are high. But the solution isn't really driving compliant behaviors, and that brings a lot of risk for pharma and biotech companies. To combat this, leadership teams, they need to ask themselves, what would I need to see to prove that this solution is actually being adopted and having a real impact on productivity or showing a return on investment?
This is a critical clarification, Tom, and early success isn't about activity or optics. It's about whether the solution is driving measurable business impact within a realistic time frame. In the first 6-12 months, leadership should expect clear signals: time saved, reduced friction in approval or compliance, or improved engagement. Those outcomes that can be qualified. Adoption only matters when it reflects real behavioral change. Otherwise, it risks becoming reporting metrics rather than evidence of value. And to close on more reflective note, Tom, is there any book that has significantly shaped how you think about strategy, decision making, or value creating, and that you would like to recommend to leaders navigating innovation in healthcare today?
Yes, absolutely. So, Selling to Big Companies is by a lady from the US called Jill Conrad. It's a book that completely changed my career. It's more from the perspective of a commercial person who would be selling services into large enterprise organizations. In a nutshell, the book reframes the B2B sales process by focusing on the needs of the decision makers, the influencers, and end users. And it's kind of crazy to me because this book was written 20 years ago, and I still see marketing, commercial, and business development people making the same mistakes that she details in the book. So, social media posts, email outreach, sales assets, the basic mistake is focusing on yourself and your solution. If you can imagine having a conversation with somebody and they only want to talk about themselves, it's not very fulfilling. Imagine a product demo that only focuses on the features of the product as opposed to the needs of the customer, or an email outreach that basically says nothing about the needs of your customer's business, just bullet points talking about how great your solution is. The main thing that I learned from reading the book was that you need to connect your solution to the current most pressing needs of your customer. And it's a bonus if you can identify a need or a challenge that the customer hasn't even realized exists yet, and also show them a solution that solves it, and really that's how you become a trusted advisor. It's an easy buzzword to put on your LinkedIn headline, but it's very difficult to understand your customers and come up with solutions to their challenges, especially when you're working in a complex industry such as life sciences.
Definitely, and Tom, I do believe that this book actually will be relevant not only for commercial leaders, but also for people from other sides, from technical side, etc., who make decisions whether they should buy some particular solution or not, because they will be able to understand more how the right sales should look like. And what you shared reinforced the core truth in life science. Value is created not by talking about solutions, but by deeply understanding the systems and people those solutions are meant to serve. And actually, that system level thinking is exactly what shaped my book, The World of Specials, which looks at the clinical research industry as an interconnected system from science and regulation to operations and commercial decision making. The link is available in the description. Tom, thank you so much for such a thoughtful and grounded conversation, and for those navigating innovation in healthcare today. Whether you are building, buying, or advising, the real advantage comes from understanding how this industry truly thinks, decides, and commits.
Thank you, Marina.